And Merry Christmas. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the Air Pollution Control District Governing Board meeting of December 14th, 2023. We're going to start with roll. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would like to remind those members of the public joining us by teleconference to please select your preferred language using the language interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Before I call the roll, I would like to note for the record that members Lawson, Reamer, and Sanchez have notified us that they will be absent from today's proceedings. All remaining board members are participating in person. With that, Member Burkbeck Garcia.
Burkbeck Garcia, present.
Member Elo Rivera.
Present.
Member Gloria. Member Gomez. Here. Member Martinez. Member Medina.
Present.
Member Vargas. Vice Chair Shu.
Here.
Chair Bush.
Here. All right, moving on to non-agenda public comment. Clerk, could you please provide the public testimony instructions?
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would ask any members of the public that would like to speak under non-agenda public communication that are here in the conference room to please approach the podium at this time. For those that are joining via teleconference, please press *9 now to indicate that you wish to speak. Seeing no movement in the chamber and no hands raised online, there are no members of the public wishing to address the board under public communication.
All right, thank you, Clerk. We'll move on with approval of statement of proceedings and the minutes for the meeting of October 12th, 2023. And Clerk, could you please provide the testimony instructions and what's needed here?
Thank you. Same instructions. Anyone here in the room that wishes to address the board on this item, please go ahead and approach the podium at this time. If there are any members of the public that are joining us via teleconference that wish to address the board on this item, please press *9 now or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Seeing no movement in the chamber and no hands raised online, there are no members of the public wishing to provide public testimony on this item.
All right, thank you. Any comments from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, may I get a motion? I'll move approval.
Second.
All right,
Gomez.
we have a motion from Vice Chair Shu, a second from Member Gomez. Would you like to call the roll?
Thank you. Member Burkbeck Garcia,
Yes.
Member Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Member Gloria, Member Gomez,
Yes.
Member Martinez, Member Medina,
Medina, aye.
Member Vargas, Vice Chair Shu,
Aye.
Chair Bush.
Yes.
Thank you. With members Gloria, Lawson, Reamer, Martinez, and Vargas absent, that motion passed, and Sanchez absent, that motion passes with those board members who are present voting aye.
All right, thank you, Clerk. We'll move on to the consent calendar. We have one item on consent. It's D1, is termination of member appointment to the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District Hearing Board. Clerk?
Thank you. I would first like to note for the record that Member Gloria has joined the meeting. I would also like to ask any members of the public that are joining us here in the conference room to please approach the podium if you wish to address the board on this item. Those members of the public that are joining us via teleconference, please press *9 now or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to indicate that you wish to speak. Seeing no movement in the chamber and seeing no hands raised online, there are no members of the public wishing to address the board under public communication for this item.
All right, thank you, Clerk. Any questions from the board, questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, can we get a motion?
I'll move approval to. And I'll second.
All right, move for approval from Member Elo Rivera and second from Shu. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Burkbeck Garcia,
Yes.
Member Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Member Gloria,
Yes.
Member Gomez,
Yes.
Member Martinez, Member Medina,
Medina, aye.
Member Vargas, Vice Chair Shu,
Aye.
Chair Bush.
Yes.
Thank you. With members Lawson, Reamer, Martinez, and Sanchez and Vargas absent, that motion passes with all board members who are present voting aye.
All right, thank you, Claire. So we'll move on to the main agenda. This item is E1, and it's an update on possible memorandum of understanding with the San Diego Unified Port District to support implementation of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy and Portside Community Emissions Reduction Plan. So we'll go ahead and have the clerk provide testimony instructions followed by a staff presentation by Deputy Director Mike Watt and Supervising Air Resources Specialist Nick Cormier.
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would ask any members of the public that would like to address the board on this item here in the conference room to please make sure that you complete a public speaker slip that is located in the back of the room, and you can submit that here and be prepared to approach the podium once the staff presentation has concluded. Those members of the public that are joining us via teleconference, you can dial into the conference line now using the instructions that are provided on your Zoom screen. You may also indicate that you wish to speak on this item by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen or by pressing *9 now. All testimony will be heard at the conclusion of the staff presentation.
And I think staff, go ahead and take it away.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Bush and governing board members. I'm Mike Black, Deputy Director over our Emission Reduction Strategies team, and I'll be introducing today's item. Today's presentation on item number 1 will provide an update on a possible memorandum of understanding between the San Diego Unified Port District and the Air Pollution Control District to support implementation of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, or MCAS, and the Portside Community Emission Reduction Plan, or CERP. The objective of a potential MOU with the port, if adopted in the future, would be to identify concrete actions that can be taken to move towards achievement of goals outlined in both the MCAS and the CERP that further reduce emissions from operations associated with port activities, facilitate the transition to zero emission equipment, enhance outreach and engagement about projects at the port, and provide health benefits to those living and working in the portside communities. I'd like to mention that we do have some staff from the Port of San Diego with us today if we have any questions or need to refer to them with anything, so we're happy to have them available to assist. And with that, I will pass it off to Nick Cormier, who is our supervisor of the Rural Development item, who will be walking us through the presentation.
All right, next slide, please. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, Chair Bush and governing board members. At the June board meeting, the board approved staff's recommendation requested action 2 to pursue a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, with the port to collaborate on emission reduction strategies, emission reductions from port operations, and collaborate on projects that support CERP and MCAS goals and strategies, and report back on progress made in December 2023. Today's board meeting will not be considering the MOU itself. Discussions between the port and APCD are conceptual at this point, and today's presentation is seeking feedback from board members on the conceptual topics discussed today. Next slide, please. As a reminder, reducing emissions from port operations and other indirect sources is challenging due to complex state and federal laws in place. Local air districts do not have the regulatory authority to directly require mobile sources such as trucks, trains, cargo handling equipment, and commercial harbor craft to be zero emission by a specific date. Such direct authority rests with CARB and EPA. However, other pathways exist that can achieve significant emission reductions, and an MOU is one of them. Some recent examples include South Coast AQMD's multiple MOUs with various airports in the Los Angeles region. There are also recent examples of indirect source rules, or ISRs, in place, but it remains to be seen whether similar rules could be implemented in the San Diego region. For example, South Coast AQMD Rule 2305 is an ISR applicable to warehouses. Though this rule is adopted, it's currently in litigation with an uncertain future, despite EPA recently proposing approval of the rule at the federal level. South Coast AQMD is also looking at a possible ISR specifically for container terminals at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, but not a lot of information has been shared publicly yet about that effort. Next slide, please. What exactly is an MOU? In short, an MOU is an agreement between two willing parties that include enforceable terms. It's non-regulatory in the sense that an MOU is not a typical rule that a local agency would adopt. However, it is nonetheless a binding contract between two entities used to achieve mutual goals. Every MOU will describe the mutually agreeable goals, as well as the actions each party must implement. Each MOU will also describe procedures about how the MOU will be implemented, as well as the process and remedies if such actions aren't completed as agreed. Key objectives APCD and the port hope to accomplish as part of this MOU include improving public health, accelerating implementation of portside CERP and MCAS goals, investing in ZEV equipment and infrastructure, strengthening existing partnerships, and keeping the community informed. The multifaceted MOU approach we are seeking, which may include policy commitments, information sharing, leveraging of interagency resources, and emission reduction opportunities, goes beyond what each agency could achieve through an incentive-only based approach. Next slide, please. There are some logistical differences and overlap between an MOU versus a possible indirect source rule that could affect port operations. The green circle on the left highlights distinct advantages of an MOU. MOUs provide an opportunity for more timely emission reductions and health benefits, whereas formal rulemaking could take years to develop and fully implement. Any ISR rulemaking effort for port operations would also be complex, with uncertain precedents, legal issues, and a confluence of international and federal laws in place. MOUs could be structured to maintain access and build in flexibilities to receive incentive funding, whereas a rule could limit such opportunities. MOUs can also provide more flexibility to address zero-emission infrastructure improvements, potentially in ways an ISR rule may not be able to achieve. The Port and APCD also have a great track record of successful implementation of MOUs in past programs, such as the successful PAIR program that was well received by Portside community members. An ISR rule affecting port operations could certainly achieve benefits as well, which could include more regulatory certainty, greater emission reductions, and more opportunities to enforce such rules if violations occur. However, both MOUs and ISRs are enforceable, can include strong accountability provisions, and can ensure reductions in emissions to improve public health. To continue making progress towards achievement of SERP and MCAS goals related to port operations, staff from both agencies feel an MOU is the best approach at this point in time. We would like to clarify that if an MOU covering port operations were ultimately adopted, and if a warehouse ISR rule is also adopted in the future, warehouses located in the port tidelands would still be subject to any applicable requirements included in a potential warehouse ISR. Staff believes facilitative actions that would be included in an MOU could ultimately assist warehouse operators or mobile source equipment owners with future compliance requirements associated with CARB mobile equipment regulations or any potential ISR rule. Next slide, please. Here's the tentative timeline for the development of a possible MOU. Both agencies have met over 20 times to date and recently discussed the MOU concepts you will hear more about today with stakeholders and the community in October. The port provided an update to the Port Board of Commissioners at their meeting last week. We will summarize comments received and the next steps for pursuing an MOU later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Now that you have heard some background and the tentative timeline, let's now go over the potential concepts the Port and APCD have been discussing in relation to the proposed MOU. On the left side of the screen are concept categories that APCD and the Port have had more opportunities to discuss and are generally in alignment on for consideration in a potential MOU. These include acknowledging existing actions that are already underway, addressing barriers for zero-emission infrastructure, reducing emissions from cargo handling equipment and trucks, and improving access to grant opportunities. On the right side are concept categories that have been identified for further conversation between the two agencies, but require more discussion in the months ahead. These include possible opportunities to reduce emissions from ocean-going vessels, transitioning the port's fleet of vehicles to zero emission, and additional methods in how the port's maritime industrial impact funding could be utilized in the portside area. It could also involve ideas that might enhance transparency and public participation in projects at the port to ensure the community's feedback is taken into account. I'll now dive deeper into each of the categories on the left side of the screen. Next slide, please. Both agencies envision the MOU will account for investments and actions that the port tenants, and APCD have taken recently to ensure these major milestones do not get overlooked. These include projects like the port's recent addition of an all-electric harbor crane at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal and zero-emission infrastructure at the 10th Avenue, National City, and cruise ship terminals. It also includes the nation's first all-electric tugboat, a new bonnet emission control system for cargo ships, and other successful projects like the PAIR program and Free Ride Around National City shuttle program. Projects outlined in red are projects that APCD assisted on, implemented, or provided significant incentive funding to support. Collectively, these projects will help advance SERP and MCAS goals and help support some of the concept categories we're also exploring as part of this MOU. Next slide, please. Incentivizing infrastructure upgrades will be critical for transitioning to zero-emission equipment. As such, both agencies envision this MOU as an opportunity to help fill this essential need. Both agencies believe investments are needed for infrastructure upgrades at 10th Avenue and National City Marine Terminals to charge zero-emission trucks, cargo handling equipment, and docked hovercraft, as well as to seek funding opportunities for these upgrades. The port will also seek to summarize planning and engineering reports of infrastructure needs to APCD to help inform stakeholders about future port electrification plans. With Portside Community Steering Committee support, the proposed MOU could also provide incentive funding set-asides for port infrastructure projects to help ensure that necessary charging capabilities are in place to facilitate the transition to zero-emission equipment. Next slide, please. Cargo handling equipment, or CHE, have been identified as a significant contributor of diesel particulate matter and cancer risk in Barrio Logan. As such, both agencies believe accelerating the turnover of diesel-fueled CHE to zero emission will result in significant health benefits to the Portside community that could be done more expediently as part of a potential MOU. The port and port tenants have expressed willingness to invest in transitioning this equipment with support from incentive programs. However, both have experienced difficulties and challenges with obtaining grant funding, including facing competition from larger ports, complex administrative requirements, or continually being put on backup funding lists. The port and APCD believe incentive funding set-asides that provide right of first refusal for such funds before offering such funding to other projects that also incorporate a community engagement, feedback, and approval loop can provide more flexible grant opportunities and certainty for affected stakeholders, while furthering progress towards achieving timelines within the impasse. Collecting data from port tenants to better position them for relevant funding opportunities could also be achieved through this MOU. Next slide, please. Both agencies believe facilitating the implementation of zero-emission trucks could also be a critical aspect of the proposed MOU. The MOU could include a commitment by the port to implement a comprehensive marine terminal port truck registry to better understand the fleet of trucks serving the port overall, their resulting emissions, and better address any programmatic or incentive needs from both agencies. The MOU could also include commitments from the port to potentially reduce port tariffs from shippers to utilize or encourage the use of zero-emission trucks to transport freight to and from the port. It would support continuing implementation of the existing port and APCD zero-emission truck pilot project, as well as exploring new incentive programs to encourage ZEV truck purchases or leasing and infrastructure to assist low-income fleet operators with the transition. The port also noted in their staff report about the possibility of providing rebates for charging electric trucks at electric vehicle charging stations at the port. The MOU could also strengthen the collaboration for what both agencies can do to help achieve the Harbor Drive 2.0 concept, including enhanced enforcement of existing truck routes, looking for ways to facilitate truck monitoring on port tidelands through sensors and signage, and cooperating on education and funding opportunities. Next slide, please. The proposed MOU would also seek to achieve emission reduction opportunities through other funding and outreach concepts. Incentive funding from APCD would not cover 100% of project costs to ensure those receiving the benefits of such funding have a stake in the project's success. One possible MOU incentive aspect could include continued implementation of existing incentive programs at both agencies, or creating new and innovative programs by seeking out other state and federal funding opportunities. Having an MOU could help better position both agencies and the region overall for competitive funding opportunities in the future by demonstrating a commitment to collaboration and coordination on outreach, education, and engagement initiatives. Next slide, please. The following slide summarizes feedback both agencies have received on the concepts presented today from a variety of stakeholders, as well as the Portside Community Steering Committee. Comments received included questions and clarifications regarding the various incentive funding aspects, accountability actions if MOU measures aren't adhered to, tying incentive funding to specified benchmarks, MOU progress reports to community members, ensuring existing and future air quality regulations remain in effect, and questions surrounding potential ZEB equipment and infrastructure commitments. Additionally, on December 5th, the Port Board of Commissioners met to discuss these concepts, which are summarized in the blue box. The Ports Board noted that they stood ready to partner with APCD on a data-driven MOU, and were encouraged that the effort could result in the first in the nation MOU between an air agency and a port covering port operations. Other comments from the Port Board included avoiding pitfalls that resulted in failed negotiations between South Coast AQMD and the ports of LA and Long Beach for a similar MOU, ensuring the MOU strikes a balance between required actions and voluntary efforts, and ensuring incentive opportunities remain flexible with ample community engagement throughout. Next slide, please. The next step in this process will see APCD and port staff continuing to have discussions in the hopes of finalizing concepts and language for inclusion into an MOU document. This will include refining the concepts you heard today, as well as the concepts that have not yet been discussed in depth, including ocean-going vessels, port fleet electrification, public participation and transparency, and maritime industrial impact funding concepts. During this time, both agencies will continue to seek feedback from the public and stakeholders, as well as incorporating the feedback received from both respective boards this month. Both agencies will seek to formulate MOU language and re-engage with stakeholders to provide an additional opportunity to review any language prior to returning to each respective board later next year. Further opportunities for the community to provide input and support any incentive-related projects proposed to be funded using AB 617 funds would also continue annually to ensure community members are informed and have a voice in such projects. Next slide, please. Today's recommendation is to receive the presentation, provide feedback to staff on the MOU concepts discussed, and give direction to continue conversations with the port on the potential MOU to support implementation of the SERP and MCAS, with consideration of the development of measurable interim milestones, a process for annual assessment, and proactive steps towards pursuit of alternative equivalent options should milestones not be achieved. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation. We are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Comier. I really appreciate the work that that our Air Pollution Control Officer, Ms. Forbes, and just all of APCD staff has done over the last few months to work on this. Really, both agencies and the port too have come a long way from where we were at just a few years ago, and ultimately this is about our air quality, our health, and so we're making these moves, and I'm excited. So, but with that, we're going to move on to public comments. Clerk, I know we have several comments both online and in person, but let's go ahead and start with the Unified Port of San Diego, since they're the ones that we're working with on this.
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would first like to note for the record that members Martinez and Vargas have joined the meeting. I also would like to note for the record that we have 4 members of the public that wish to address the board on this item, with 1 additional member of the public being online. I ask that you state your name for the record before you begin. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. Please self-regulate your time. You can begin by stating your name for the record.
Thank you. Jason Giffen with the Port of San Diego, Vice President for the Planning and Environments Division at the Port. So good afternoon, Chairman Bush, members of the governing board. I'm also joined today by port staff, but in the event that there's any specific questions, more specifically, Mike LaFleur, our Vice President of Maritime, is here, as well as Phil Gibbons, our Program Director in the Planning Department. I'd also like to just say thanks as well to Air Pollution Control Officer Forbes and Mike Watt, who came to our meeting last week, and that collaboration is very important, and so we appreciate that. Just a little brief snippet in terms of some backgrounds. Most of you are very familiar with the port, but I want to just give a little bit of background on where we've been, where we're going, and how this MOU could help. As you all know, the Port of San Diego is a self-funded agency that contributes a little over $9.2 billion to the county's economy, with over 64,000 jobs in San Diego County. We're also an environmental champion for San Diego Bay, and we manage the surrounding tidelands of San Diego Bay, focused on air, land, water, and wildlife stewardship and improvement. And as APCD's presenters mentioned, thanks very much, Nick. We have been meeting for several months now on how we can continue our partnership and focus on some MOU concepts. We really value the contributions and collaboration we've had so far, along with our working waterfront stakeholders and the portside community members. We're already on track and have a track record of putting action forward. Together, we've implemented shared goals to improve our air quality, and they're both embedded in the SERP as well as the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. The Board of Port Commissioners adopted our Maritime Clean Air Strategy, as you're familiar with, in October 2021, with the vision of health equity for all. We're very focused on that. We developed the MCAS to prepare for new regulations that are coming across the state and really to position the port in our region to pursue public funding opportunities and build infrastructure and deploy zero emission technologies ahead of schedule like Nick just spoke about. And we're already making great progress. The port and our tenants so far have invested over $100 million in zero emissions technology and infrastructure projects to implement many of the goals and objectives of the MCAS. And this is a sizable down payment as we start to look to build and maintain modern, efficient, and sustainable maritime operations. I won't go through the list of projects that we have. Nick outlined a few, like shore power and the first all-electric tug in the United States. But these projects are being realized not because of one entity, but because of the partnership that's happening across the San Diego region. We understand there's much more to do to reduce pollution from our maritime operations, and an MOU between our two agencies represents that unique opportunity to strengthen partnerships, overcome specific barriers to transitioning to zero emissions technologies, and accelerate implementation of the MCAS and the SERP ahead of regulation.
Oh, Mr. Giffen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Don't worry about the time, so you can.
Well, I'm
yeah,
almost
keep-
done.
Okay, yeah, so no, keep going. You're good.
I just want to, like we mentioned last week, we presented the MOU concepts to the board that Nick walked through. They really emphasize our commitment to pollution reduction and strong support for the non-regulatory strategies. And our board urged both parties to continue to lead on this issue, and we'll be back before them again next year. So thanks very much, and thanks for the indulgence for the extra few seconds.
Absolutely. No, thank you. All right, clerk.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Fawcett. You can approach the podium at this time. You have 3 minutes to address the board. Please begin by stating your name for the record, and you can use the timer on the screen to regulate your time.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Amy Fawcett, and I'm here representing the San Diego Working Waterfront tenants. And I want to start by saying that we do support in concept the MOU. We want to thank APCD staff and port staff for the time and attention that you've given us to provide our concerns and any type of things that we need to address in order for us to fulfill the expectations and the goals. We do support emissions reductions efforts. We also do support electrification. I do want to just ask that as you're going through it, Nick did a really good job outlining some of the concerns that we have. But just 3 of them just to put out there is, and I know everybody does not like hearing this, but we don't control in a lot of the cases, the trucks that actually customers come to pick up the cargo and the shipments that come in. So just keep that in mind as an understanding point on the drafting of the language of MOU. The second one is obviously grant funding and incentives in order for us to be able to move forward in that electrification and transitioning. The incentives is a very big deal for us. I will also say that one of the issues with regards to grant funding that we've found ourselves in is because San Diego is so progressive, moving forward and aggressive with the electrification and the emissions reduction. We are now there's been some tenants that have been told their equipment is too clean and therefore you do not qualify. So that's kind of the aggressiveness of the goals as well as the criteria for grant funding and incentives probably need to catch up with each other. And then the third one that I just lost my train of thought, which is why I don't have my notes here. But anyway, so those are 2 of the bigger ones that we have. And when it comes to improvements with the electrification of trucks, we do support that. Obviously highlighted the fact that we don't control a lot of them, but as we move forward and as that technology comes on, if you could all keep in mind that the technology advancements and where it is and where it's not, when you're putting together the requirements and the criteria. But at the end of the day, I just want to thank APCD staff and port staff for giving us this opportunity and for talking with us. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nicholas Bowley. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. You may begin by stating your name for the record. Please self-regulate your time using the timer at the screen.
Good afternoon, governing board members, APCD staff. My name is Nicolas Paul with the Environmental Health Coalition. I wanted to take a moment to recognize the work of the APCD staff working with the Port of San Diego on this MOU. EHC believes that if done right, this agreement can be a powerful mechanism in advancing the goals committed to in the MCAS and CERT. There are interests, however, that are going to want to distract and delay efforts to address our region's greatest air quality challenges. And we're here to say, don't be fooled. There are grounding facts that are important to recognize and use to inform our approaches to things like this MOU. And this is what we know. The San Diego Portside community has some of the worst air quality in the state of California. And for that reason, it was designated as a CAP community by CARB. The cancer risk in the port side is estimated to be about 950 cancers per million, and 85% of that total cancer risk is attributed to diesel particulate matter that comes from heavy-duty trucks, stationary equipment, and other sources. We know, because the port has published these figures in the past, the amount of diesel truck trips at the Port of San Diego cargo terminals has increased over time. In 2019, they were at just over 86,000 truck trips at their cargo terminals. And by 2022, that increased to over 101,000. Today, less than 1% of trucks at the port are zero emission. And this impact from this pollution can be felt in the elevated cancer risk in our community, the elevated asthma rates, and other quality of life issues. EHC requests the following recommendations be integrated in the MOU negotiations with the port to guarantee accountability and true reductions in the pollution in the port side. We really appreciate the affirmation by Nick's presentation earlier, reaffirming that this MOU is not a regulatory exemption. So we're really happy to hear that today. The second thing that we'd like to see is we want to see requirements of specific milestones towards that transition. We are 2 years away from the port's first 2026 benchmark of 40% of trucks calling to the terminals. We need interim benchmarks to demonstrate how we're going to get there. These goals, these interim benchmarks are an accountability tool. If earmarked funds are going to be awarded, it needs to be a reward for achieving said benchmarks. And lastly, we want to see strong port tenant and project ZEB requirements to protect us from new project proposals or new tenants that will introduce new diesel pollution into our communities, like the Mitsubishi Cement Corporation project. These are 4 recommendations that we think are balanced. It gives room for negotiation with the port. And again, this is a reflection of the feedback that was given to the APCD staff during the October CSC meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Maritza Garcia. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. Please begin by stating your name for the record, and you can self-regulate your time using the timer on the screen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Maritza Garcia. I'm a junior policy advocate with the Environmental Health Coalition, a member of the AB 617 steering committee, but most importantly, I'm a second-generation Logan resident. Living in Logan means you're surrounded by beautiful artwork, a plethora of culture, and a real close community. It's truly a magical place to live. But amidst all that magic lies the devastating reality that is living with an overwhelming amount of pollution. Being neighbors to the port, the freeway, and other industry has many negative health effects on our bodies. Even on the clearest of days, you can see a little bit of a haze hovering over our community. Our lungs cannot escape the diesel particulate matter that flows heavily into our air, piling up day after day, causing our community to have the highest rate of hospital visits due to asthma and other respiratory complications. Many of my neighbors suffer financial hardship due to the high medical bills and having to miss work or school because they're taking care of someone that's sick or they're sick themselves. This is unfortunately the norm for many who live in Logan, and it's unacceptable to continue this way. I have seen APCD and the port work more with the community to rectify these injustices, and this is a perfect opportunity to continue that momentum and strengthen its positive impacts. That is why we need to ensure that this MOU is strong and has a clear and meaningful commitment from the port to reduce its pollution to our community. I urge you to include the following into the MOU. No regulatory exemptions for the Port of San Diego. This MOU should be in addition to any current and future air district rules and should not provide a way to be exempt from them. A requirement to achieve specific milestones towards jet transition is needed. There's only 7 years to transition to the MCAS and CERP goals of 100% ZEV trucks, and to have these milestones in place will ensure that that goal is reached. Provide incentive funding by rewarding the attainment of ZEV transition milestones. Setting funds aside for the port to obtain more ZEV trucks is a good plan, but it should only be available if previous milestones are actively being achieved. And lastly, there needs to be a strong port tenant and project ZEV requirement outlined in the MOU. We cannot have another tenant like the Mitsubishi Cement Corporation trying to set up shop in our port. They would have brought nothing but more pollution and hazard to our community. And honestly, it was quite upsetting that the idea was being maintained in the first place, when the MCAS and the CERP have solid goals that we all agreed on achieving. We cannot accept any more pollution in our community, and we deserve better. You have the power to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is online, Nancy Cruz. You have 3 minutes to address the board. You can use the timer that is on your Zoom screen, and please begin by stating your name for the record. You may start when you're ready.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Nancy Cruz, and I'm a Logan resident for over a decade. Through this time, my health has been impacted, as you can hear in my voice today. I have developed allergies and frequent cough. My family also has had health complications. My 7-year-old niece, who is now developing respiratory issues and is at risk of being diagnosed with asthma, which has caused her to miss school. There are many community members with chronic diseases, including cancer. Just a month ago, my elderly neighbor shared that she was diagnosed with cancer. This is a result of concentration of 2 hotspots a few blocks away from our homes. According to CARB studies, the overall pollution-weighted cancer risk in the AB 617 Portside community was estimated to be about 950 cancer cases per million. Diesel particulate matter was the main contributing pollutant to the total average risk within the community and accounted for 85% of the total risk. This is unacceptable. For far too long, my community's health has been disregarded, impacting our ability to live with dignity. I praise that this board has been taking action to prioritize the most impacted communities. Thanks to APCD, the county, the port, and EHC, I'm able to have a purifier in my home that allows me to sleep better at night. But a purifier does not resolve contamination and toxins emitted by the port. In your consideration for an MOU, it is imperative you are clear in the goal, which should be to prioritize communities' health. I ask that APCD and the port's MOU reflect goals set by the MCAS and the CERP. The MOU should be clear that the port should not be given any exceptions to APCD regulations. The MOU should include milestones towards zero-emission vehicle transition, funding that is allocated towards meeting milestones, and a commitment from the port to ensure any future tenants are in alignment with CEF goals. There should be no new deadly diesel coming into the port. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That concludes public testimony on this item.
Great, thank you, clerk. Thank you to the Port, Working Waterfront, Environmental Health Coalition, and community members for attending the meeting and speaking and public comments. I also want to give a special shout out to Ms. Garcia for attending. And I'm so glad you feel welcome bringing your babies. So thank you for that trust. And I just want to say we at APCD, we want to make this a welcoming environment for families to come and participate, because ultimately that's what this is about. That's what the work we do. And I hope we just continue that with our public agencies. So with that, I will move on to board member questions and comments. I see a couple hands up. We'll go ahead and start with member Vargas and then we'll move on to member Gloria.
Thank you. So first and foremost, thank you to everyone that is here today. And I want to thank the team for all of the work that they've done, APCD, and I want to express my appreciation for all the work that has been done. And my favorite part is that she is here because I think, no, really, I'm not kidding, because I think she reminds us exactly why we're here, right? It's for all of our babies in Barrio Logan that for too long have suffered. And all of the work that the APCD staff has done for the past years in developing the indirect source emission rule, I think is the work that needs to be done. I know that it means a lot to the communities in District 1, the communities that I represent that have historically been impacted by air pollution. And I've served on APCD now. This is my third year since I became a supervisor, and I shared this committee for this board for a while. And I want to acknowledge that in my role as a supervisor, in my capacity as a member, and now as a member of CARB, it's really, I have seen the work that we've done together with the port continues to be stronger and stronger. So I appreciate that, and so I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge that we've been able to provide, we've done a lot of work together. We've provided more than $2.7 million in grants, funding to support technology investments. And that's just one of the many efforts to see that we ensure a just and strong transition, not just for industry, but also for our communities, for working, for workers and children and families. And that's important. But I think that is why it's so important that we really do create the development of this MOU, and that we make sure that it's so important for me that as we're focusing on improving the air quality for all, that it's actually in writing, and that we do that, because as we know, and as we said before, the zip code that you live in shouldn't determine the quality of air that you're breathing, because we know that to achieve this, we have to hold people accountable, and we have to have clear guidelines that we have to follow. If we've learned anything from the past, is that if we don't do that, it's not going to happen. That we can't leave it just to collaboration for that to happen. And although we've made significant progress, I don't want to just leave it to that, right? I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we have made significant progress, and we want to make sure that we continue to do this with good work. And I want to acknowledge the port's, ability to continue that work with all of us, but we cannot leave the health of our communities to chance. And that's why I want to make a motion that we recommend that we continue to negotiate for an MOU between the APCD and the port, but that it should include benchmarks that demonstrate the path that the port is following to reach the maritime clean air strategies goals for 2026 and 2030. And based on those benchmarks, APCD can increase the incentive amount for the port, and the benchmarks are met, but this funding must be approved annually by the Port Subcommittee Steering Committee. And I think the MOU should make it clear that there can be no diesel pollutions from new and current operations at the port, and that the MOU is not to be used as a regulatory carve-out for those operations as well. I think that's important as we move forward.
All right, so, and that was a motion, member Vargas? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, a second by member Gloria, and I think member Gloria wanted to speak next.
Yes, please. Thanks to staff for the presentation. It's always helpful to enliven the staff report with the presentation. So thank you for that. And then of course, to the members of the public for being here as well. I appreciate Chair Vargas's comments and motion. I want to clarify with regard to the recommendation that's on the screen. I appreciate having this slide up. The direction that you're seeking today. I'm comfortable with those comments there. I think we heard public testimony of things that are aspired to in terms of this ongoing negotiation. Does the motion as constituted, or even frankly your original recommendation, I don't see that as precluding any of the topics that are raised. I think the direction is that we want those things discussed as part of negotiation back and forth, and what I believe Chair Vargas's motion is inclusive of, yes, we want to direct staff to include those items, and we'll see how those negotiation works. Obviously, we'll ultimately have the ability to either ratify or not an MOU that you end up negotiating. Sorry, I think there was a lot in there. Here's what I'm saying, I think that what was stated is allowed by what your recommendation is. I think the chair's motion further highlights or emphasizes that. Ultimately, you're gonna go to the table trying to talk about all the issues that were raised today.
That's correct. I mean, I think as staff presented, we're at the conceptual stage of these negotiations. And so the recommendation that we provided was taking some of the concepts that we've heard both in the public process and from various stakeholders and trying to provide some of that conceptual guidance and framework that we're looking for in direction from the board. And so in the motion that was made, I think there was reference to some other factors that certainly we could take into account as we go into the negotiations. I think there's probably a couple of items in there that we may want to clarify, just to ensure that we've got a clear understanding of what the motion is and what the direction is from the board.
Understood. And Ms. Forbes, I certainly have confidence in you and your team to make sure that these issues that you are already exploring, plus the additional ones raised today by tenants, EHC, members of the public, are part of these discussions. I don't think nothing's off the table. It's subject to right.
That's correct. I mean, I think at this point, you know, like I say, we're at a very conceptual stage in the negotiations and looking at a lot of different potential measures that can be included in an MOU to ensure those emission reductions.
Okay. Well, again, I have trust in our staff. I think you know this board, it's very different than the old board, and where we're trying to go as an air agency, and obviously as two local entities, you know, negotiating with one another. Hopefully, we can all see the wisdom of figuring out how we can deliver the biggest wins for our community. Recognize it's always good, right? None of this stuff is particularly easy, but as one of the public commenters mentioned, we do want to be leaders in the space. So I think you're well aware of that. We've talked individually. I think this board has been enough for you to know what we also would support. And so I just want to empower you to go to the table to talk about as many of these issues as possible. Bring back the strongest MOU that is implementable, achievable, and allow us to consider that, as I believe was noted somewhere else in the slideshow, somewhere in calendar year 2024. Do we have an idea when we're talking in 2024?
I think we're optimistically hoping for summer 2024, but a lot of that will depend obviously on, you know, the subject of negotiations and all that.
Understood. That gives us some ability as a board to ask. It's September, we're gonna ask you.
How are things going?
Yeah, okay, very good.
I just,
Please.
to clarify, the comments that I made is just, I want to make sure that community is included. So the recommendations that were made are absolutely, I absolutely trust the recommendations that were made by APCD staff, absolutely experts. And I want to make sure that the voices of the community are included in this MOU discussion, and so that's why I wanted to make sure that it is very specific in the negotiation. So and so that's why I added them. That's my what I want to make sure that. Thank you. So we're good. I think we're good. I just want to make sure I documented that. And you have that, right?
Okay, so we will restate the motion before that, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on to member questions and comments. So Vice Chair Shu.
Thank you, and I really want to acknowledge the leadership from both Chair Vargas and Mayor Gloria, because the reason why we're here and we're able to work on this is a lot of the work that was done prior to me being on the APC board for many years. So thank you. And I support the motion for a lot of reasons. One is because I think all of us, as stated by both the tenants and certainly the community, want to support the MCAS and the goals that it has. These are goals that we really probably should have had years ago, but they're here before us now. They're going to be difficult goals to meet, but we really need to do it, and it's actually very doable. We've learned, and the Port District has learned, that a large number of the pollution from vehicles is coming from a small number of trucks. So that actually if we are smart and we convert the trucks that use the port the most, we'll be able to reach much of our goals without having to change all 2,000 trucks that go to the port on a regular basis. Maybe just changing 10-20% will get us a good start. So it's achievable. We just need to be smart about how we go about things. And I'm willing, as I'm appreciative of our efforts to involve both the port tenants as well as the Port Side Community Steering Committee in our process with regards to incentivizing. I have a friendly amendment that I'd like to make because in seeing how things work in government and with pretty good goals and actually pretty strong goals that are hard to achieve, that you need an interim goal as well as an interim incentive. So my friendly amendment is that one, that we need to model our improvements. And second, that by 2026, about halfway towards our goal in 2030 and 2031, if we're not modeling a achievement of meeting the goals, that other measures come into play. So whatever measures we come up in the next 2 years, that we essentially double or triple our efforts so that we can assure that we could reach those goals. There are many measures that can be used, and I want to make sure that this MOU includes them. So I should probably restate that.
I was just gonna ask you that, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Amendment is something that's understandable in one sentence. Or actually, I'll make two parts to it. One is that that interim goals are set for 2026. And second, that if those goals are not met and that we're behind in reaching our 2020, 30 and 31 goals, that additional measures are taken that come into play immediately thereafter. That enough of a amendment that you can.
Let's clarify with our council, and then it's, since it's a friendly amendment, then we'll have the maker of the motion and the second chime in.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what's happening here. So membership, I'm not sure that I see the difference between your friendly amendment and the motion that's currently on the screen. Other than maybe the year 2026, I don't know if that was.
I'm checking out 2026 interim target.
Okay.
That if we're not looking good by 2026 and meeting our goals, that additional measures will be coming into play.
Okay, so the change from the motion that's on the screen is 2026.
Correct, just making sure that we have an interim target, so that when we come to 2026, we don't say, well, nothing's not working well. Well, we still have the target for 2030 and 31. We should be making sure that we meet those targets.
So procedurally, I just want to make sure that we, don't get too confused. But technically, what is supposed to happen is you have a motion that's on the floor, and then you have a second, and then you have a discussion on it. And then you can have a vote if it seems like a discussion is passed or is complete. And then, the first vote is to accept the amendment. And if the amendment is accepted, then you vote on the motion. If the amendment is not accepted, then you vote on the original motion.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, we have the original proposal from staff, and we have a motion from member Vargas, and then we have an additional amendment from member Shu. So I think what I would suggest is we have this conversation, see if we can get a second on the amendment from member Shu. And then we vote our way out back to the original.
No, I think that's what we're doing, but we need to understand what we are trying to get from you is if his request is legal addition.
Well, and if it's an addition to the vote, to the motion by member Vargas.
So I would have to accept this motion, right, legally?
You need a second.
Well, you could.
Robert's rules Rosenberg rules will require us to have a motion and a second and a vote on the amendment. If the amendment is accepted, then we can go ahead and have a vote on the original motion.
On your motion.
On your motion.
And then.
I think, can we restate that I'm even confused, so we need to, so member, Vice Chair Shu needs to make a motion. Someone needs to second, and then a second layer of that is having the original maker of the motion and the original second vote on this, is that correct?
So the way that I interpret Member Shu's motion is that it would amend it so that the interim milestones need to have a benchmark year of 2026. And so if that were to pass, then we would include that in the list that, that member Vargas put together.
Right, and, you know, we could go either way. Apparently, you're treating it like a substitute motion. So we could do that as a substitute motion, or I've also seen it done as simply the author of the motion accepting the amendment and going forward with that amendment.
Member Gomez?
Yeah, member, should we just have a point of clarification for the reference to the 2026? We clarify the milestones can get to setting the milestones, but in terms of 2026, don't we get that with the process for annual assessments? I mean, there's a purpose for that request. I'm sure that's gonna determine if the benchmarks are getting met, and if not, something would happen. I'm just trying to understand.
I'm trying to be general, but yet specific to the point at which we know that additional measures may come into play if we don't meet our goals for 2026. And so I'm trying to clarify that with that additional amendment.
Okay,
So.
but the reference to the annual assessment, would it get what you're trying to clarify?
The annual assessment doesn't trigger additional measures, it just does additional assessments. So I've seen governments not meet certain goals, you know, our climate action goals, for example, and they're completely ignored year after year. So I want to make sure that we do implement additional measures if we're not meeting our annual goals.
Okay, so maybe just adding a comma to that and giving it a little bit more pointed reference to staff. There's an annual assessment, and if not met, an evaluation to the goals or to the process.
I would say
Versus-
specifically additional measures in order to meet the goals for 2036,
Yeah.
2030 and 2031.
If I might, I think that part of our intent was with the third point that you see here was to include that discussion on what other alternatives might be, you know, included if those milestones weren't met. So that was the intent of what we had put together. Just wanted to make sure that, you know, to point that out to our government.
Okay, yes, Ms. Forbes, and then I'm gonna have, just so everyone's clear on the bylaws, I'm gonna have the clerk read the bylaws. It states the process for amending real quick, and then we need to, move on.
So I just wanted to offer a couple of points as we're, the board is considering the motion. First is I would ask for, you know, as I mentioned, we're kind of at the conceptual stage here. And I think staff has done a terrific job working with the board in fleshing out a lot of these concepts. And I think the more flexibility that we can have as we move through those negotiations, I think we'll be able to end up with a better product. And so I think that's why you see, you know, the recommendation phrased as it was. With that, I will say that we are, obviously, the board will have the final say on any MOU that we bring back. And prior to that, we will be going back to the community steering committee for Portside to ensure that there is community support for use of any AB 617 funds that would be associated with an MOU. That's going to be part of the requirement. And then the last thing I would note is that we also need to be mindful of if provisions end up in the MOU that are very prescriptive as to be equivalent to a regulation, that could impact our ability to use incentive funding to get those emission reductions more quickly. And so again, I think that's something that I would just ask the board to be mindful of, because as we're looking at, for example, some of the potential additions to the motion, anything that comes back as being so prescriptive as to be the equivalent of a regulation would impact our ability to use incentive funding in that process.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morgan. So we're gonna move on to the clerk. If you just please for all of us clarify the process for amendments, and then we're gonna call the motion, see if there's a second.
Thank you, Chair Bush. The governing board bylaws section 1.14.5 for amendment of motion. A motion on the floor may be amended by motion at any time before adoption or rejection. If the motion to amend fails, the original motion will be voted upon. If the motion to amend passes, the amendment is adopted, and thereafter, the original motion as amended will be voted upon.
Thank you, clerk. With that, member Shu, or Vice Chair Shu has made a motion. Do I hear a second for that motion? Hearing none, the amendment dies for lack of a second. So we'll move on for comments. And then I saw member Burkett Garcia, and then I think I saw a couple of others. So Burkett Garcia.
Hi, I'd like to thank the APCD staff and the port for the work that you guys have been doing to conceptualize this. I want to thank the community members who are present here today for lending your voice. I think that is very, very important, and I'm grateful that the community is a part of this. Being the public health member, I want to remind everyone, and Member Vargas nicely reminded us that children are part of the reason we're doing this. We're doing this for the health of our community. And I want to just not necessarily give you a gentle reminder, because some of you may not know, 2023 was the first year that respiratory illnesses in pediatric patients were so bad that the county of San Diego ran out of pediatric beds. Navy, Ray's Children's Hospital, Kaiser, where I work, we had 0 beds. We were holding children in our ERs for days. Rady's opened their post-op area, their PACU area to board children who were on CPAP, on high flow. So this is really impacting our county. This is something real, not even during COVID. This was that tridemic when we had RSV, when we had flu, when we had COVID hitting us earlier this year. We are now in the surge of another respiratory season. I have days where I am boarding children at hospitals that have 0 pediatric doctors, 0 pediatric nurses. So this is not something that is out in our future. This is something that is affecting the health, I can say it, of our children now because I'm a pediatrician, but we also have hospitals boarding our elders and our peers. So I just want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind, because I'm the public health member. That's my job to remind you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, member Garcia. That's why we have you on here. There's a special shout out to member Gloria for again recreating this structure, and this is exactly why this we have this. So, member Medina.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, APCD and the board. We're very excited to have you here. As the science public member, you gave me the opening. One of the things that I really like about the idea of this MOU is that it is encompassing areas of contamination and pollution and emissions that are not part of our charts. They're not part of what we do. And I'm not only talking about the EV vehicles and trucks, but the ocean-going vessels. And we are a maritime nation, and we're one of the ports that, along the West Coast. Maybe we're not the largest, but, I know the board wanted to expand that. But ocean-going vessels also are sources of much pollution. And as a coastal city, we're probably one of the first people that feel them. And so I'm excited to have that be part of the conversations. I know Nick, it wasn't one of the ones that are defined, but I would strongly suggest that we find ways to include that in the motion. And so I do support the motion, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Medina. Any other comments from board members? Member Yolo Rivera?
Thank you, Chair Bush. Thank you for the work on this. And the words of our community members as well. Member Chair, I do want to kind of acknowledge what you were saying. I definitely feel you on wanting to make sure that the benchmarks aren't being met. That there's something in place to make sure that we start to change course. I think where I heard Member Gomez going is one, kind of the language someone speaking to that, and then also entrusting staff. I think the intent of the board seems pretty clear here that is the case. But maybe they feel like 2025 is the year that, so just wanting to make sure that they have the flexibility to do their work as the technical experts that they are, in those conversations with the port. Without getting too far into the weeds, or kind of too specific here, I do just want to say that, I'd like to make sure that we have a clear focus on EVs. Again, don't want to get too far in the weeds. Want to make sure you all have the latitude to do the work the way you need to do it. But incremental milestones there are going to be, specifically with EVs, are going to be important to me, as well as funding agreements and incentives, anything that we can to limit new sources of emissions. Appreciate the Chair Vargas's motion, certainly supportive of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing this very, very able staff of ours go to work with the clear intent that the board seems to deliver today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Yolo Rivera. So we have Member Gomez, and then we will move on to the vote with Member Vargas restating the motion.
Thank you, and I'm supportive of the motion, but I do have a question for staff in terms of being that this is the beginning stages and you're looking for direction or where we stand. Obviously, there's part of that, but for me, the question that I have is this MOU being crafted and discussed as a form of incentives only, or is there something else as well?
I think it's a mixture of incentives and, opportunities for, things like we talked about, additional data sharing, truck registries, some options for how to, I guess it's a different form of incentives, like we talked about ways that the port can utilize potential tariff reductions to try to encourage ZEV transition, as well as opportunities for enhanced outreach and engagement. We heard some feedback from community members about, wanting to learn more about port projects and how they support the MCAS and CERC goals. And so I think there are opportunities for things like that as part of the MOU discussion as well. So we're looking at it as more than just an incentive document.
Okay, and I asked that just because I mean, it's been said, but I just wanna, as a resident of one of the impacted communities and folks have been fighting for quite a while for clean air, I just think that incentives haven't gotten us there, not even policies. So I just think like we definitely need to be more aggressive. And I don't know what that looks like either, but I just really wanted to say it out loud and on the record that it really is critical that we get there sooner rather than later. And I know that there's only certain parameters, and just as Member Medina mentioned, this is getting us to talk about other areas, and that's good. But I think this comment is more towards sport, being that they're here. I just do think that we need to do better, just because the air quality in this community, even though there's been a lot of efforts over the years, and there's been operations that have not been allowed because of the community's pressure. But I think the board really needs to step up in a genuine way to really do the work on behalf of the community. So I really do think that as we're having this discussion, that they really do honor this document and this conversation in a way that is going to lead to faster implementation, because it's time. So technology is there. I only hope that the political will is there, resources are there. And I know the industry is constantly asking for either waivers or saying this is gonna break my business, but I just think the elevation of people's health is really critical and it's important. So this is not for staff really, but it's more for the board. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez. We have a question from Vice Chair Shu, and then we'll move on with calling, restating the motion, calling the vote.
Thank you, Chair. It was mentioned that there's a registry program, and I was wondering if Jason, you could come up and maybe answer a quick question I have. I know you guys are doing some good work in terms of figuring out how many trucks we have, how often they come, who they are. It seems like the registry would be a very important component of that, and whether we can expect that registry to be done in the next few months, or if there are any impediments to that.
Sure, this is Phil Gibbons for the record. We are actually in the final touches of developing our registry system that will be located at both of our terminals at 10th Avenue as well as National City. We've been developing it for the past year or so. It's actually in deployment down at National at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal right now. It's a pretty robust registry. It not only tracks the trucks coming into the terminal via their license plate, but it actually connects into CARB databases. So CARB requires the seaport to verify compliance with incoming vehicles for a couple of the regulations. And so we've been communicating with CARB staff on having our registry system extract that data from CARB's databases so we can do it. It also is designed to streamline some manual processes that we've been doing for years at the port. So as we're working with CARB to do that, they just released their information to us a couple of weeks ago. So, we're kind of, we built up down at National City, we're just waiting to install the cameras there. As we get up to Kings at 10th Avenue, it'll be deployed. And we're happy to share the information on the trucks that are coming through the terminal with the public. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that clarification, because that gives us another tool to work with, and I think gives us means to look at what measures can be used and what's available to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Vargas, can you please restate the motion?
See. Here we go. So, basically the recommendation is to negotiate an MOU between the APCD and the port, which includes benchmarks that demonstrate the path that the port is following to reach their maritime clean air strategy goals for 2026 and 2030. And those benchmarks, based on these benchmarks, APCD can increase the incentive amount for the port. If the benchmarks are met, that this funding must be approved annually by the Portside Community Steering Committee. The MOU should make clear that there be no new diesel pollution from new and current operations at the port. MOU is not to be used as a regulatory carve-out for operations. Non-regulatory exceptions for the port is any.
So we have thank you for.
That was my motion. I just wanted to make sure, Council President, Shanila mentioned something about the charging infrastructure. It was part of the concept, so I don't know, is that supposed to be called out?
No, that was just.
That was just conversation. Okay, I wanted to make sure that.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Are we ready?
And my understanding is, everything that I added is already part of that, so I was adding to that recommendation, or is that?
Ms. Vargas, can you clarify so that the language that staff understands that, and before we call the roll?
Well, so, I think some of the language is more, obviously, adding specifics to what is here.
Yeah, so
And
you
what
need
is
me to read all of
currently
that and get it home.
So, just in terms of, it was a comment that I mentioned earlier that, to the extent that the MOU gets incredibly prescriptive, we may lose the ability to bring in incentive funding to achieve some of those reductions.
Okay.
And so I think one of the ones that we have some concern about is the reference to no new diesel pollution. In that having the MOU state that, certainly there's, abilities for us to achieve meaningful reductions through the MOU, and that's the intent of the conceptual language that you see. But when there's a blanket prohibition like that gets incorporated into an MOU, my concern is that it could end up hampering our ability to bring incentive funding to the table.
I just want to add an additional concern. I think having that as a mandate for the MOU may be difficult because it requires having the legal authority to put that on the port tenants. And there are certain times entitlements to receiving permits or doing other activities. So I am concerned without looking into it in a lot more detail, but I'm fairly confident that would be a hard thing for the port to agree to.
So what if you did, you have all these recommendations, you add these benchmarks into the recommendations. And if we're trying to transition out of diesel, is there a way to say that you are?
Or if I may, could we put that, we don't want to be overly prescriptive, we want to be flexible with staff, but I mean, I do think it's good in this, in entering into this negotiation with the port to have, you know, some, maybe some comments, can that be incorporated as a comment, as a goal for the board instead of, so I don't know if the maker wants to amend to kind of address the staff's concerns here, trying to balance between flexibility and the, you know, that if I hear you, staff, Ms. Forbes and council.
No, I don't agree. I think that I would be comfortable with including that as a goal. So that, you know, we can maybe include reporting requirements and just a way of measuring progress and maybe as a tool for targeting funds. And we can see if we try to go a little bit further than that, but it would depend on the level of control the port has on certain resources.
If I might, there was some language from one of the commenters regarding strong project ZEV requirements. I feel like something like that, it might be a bit of a better approach to give us some of that additional flexibility without being overly prescriptive.
I'm okay with saying both. I think we gotta push people. If we don't push people to get to that space, we're never gonna get there. I mean, I know we have to still work on the infrastructure, but we just got back from Korea and we saw what other entities are doing. We gotta push people. If we don't push people, this is the entity that has to do it. And people, I mean, we just heard from Dr. Midland here, you know, how people are suffering. So we gotta push people, and industry is gonna work with us. We're gonna fight for that funding so that we can get to that transition. But if we don't fight for that, we're not gonna get there. So let's not be the agency that pushes back. Let's be the agency that pushes to get people to where they need to get. So let's figure out how to get there, and let's figure out how we build those MOUs to get to that place. How about that? We can do that. And I'm agreeing with you.
Right,
So
no, I'm
saying-
agreeing with, and
All
I
right.
just am thinking of it in terms of the specific
Yeah,
language to
so
the motion.
I'm going there, and I'm saying, I'm okay to amend my motion, then I'm saying, let's not walk away from it completely. I could philosophically have a conversation with the board, they just heard what I said, right? So I'm okay with stepping back, but I'm just saying, don't walk away completely and just saying EV, I'm just saying, let's continue to push so that it's part of the conversation, because we're gonna have to meet our goals eventually. We're gonna have to create the infrastructure globally to get there, because those are the goals that we're trying to reach.
Correct.
So, you know, gotta keep talking about it, and we're gonna have to figure out how to get there, so. But
Process, okay, so process wise, I just want to be clear. So we have a motion in the second, and that was original, that was already on the floor. So, we would have to go through a process if we're going to make any additions to your original amendment, even if it's those goals, then we do need to follow the process that I outlined earlier. So
I don't think so, right? I could just strike that piece. You have to read the motion?
No, okay. I want to make sure that the maker of the motion and the second understand what's on the table, and then we can move on to, because this is getting convoluted.
It should be, because council just said that I don't have to use, that she doesn't, that it could create some challenges, so I'm amicably saying it's all good. And if you're good, we're good, so.
I'm always good. I think, and I understand the motion is what's on the screen.
And the additional comment.
With comments that staff are gonna take into consideration as they begin negotiate, as they work on negotiating MOU. You've heard from various board members what we're interested in seeing, and ideally you bring back agreements on that. If you don't, obviously we're gonna ask questions and we may push you further, or we may reject the MOU. So I think what you have is a strong affirmation in the motion of what is recommended, but also additional directions of what we want you to explore. And we'll see you back in 2024 to discuss the evaluate this further. Is that the nature of the motion?
Yeah, so it's the motion and all of the other additional items that I included, except for the diesel comment. The diesel comment, the, what was it? So you diesel is not, we're gonna take that one out, and it's gonna be part of the conversation that you're gonna have with the board. And it's gonna include the EV conversation, and we're gonna include it as a bigger conversation about goals. And we've already heard my conversation around that, right?
It was also sort of summarizing the chicken scratch, you know. To read it as I see it, I say it without any help.
Yes.
So as I see in narrative, it is to include 3 items that are on the screen, which is to continue negotiations with the port on the MOU to support the serve in the impact implementation, with consideration of developing measurable interim milestones that include the benchmark years of 2026 and 2030.
I thought that was amended. I didn't think that we were including the 20.
Yes, we are, the first she's reading it.
A process for annual assessment. If the benchmarks are met,
That's what he second. It's over here.
Council, sorry, continue.
if the benchmarks are met, then increased funding can be provided if approved by the CSC. Work towards negotiations that reduce diesel or maintain diesel emissions, to not increase, let me put things there. And to ensure that there is no regulatory carve out for operations.
That's what I was on.
Okay. Vice Chair Shu, and then we're gonna move on to the vote. Council, did you?
I don't need to make any additional comment. I think staff knows that we don't want to increase diesel, and that's part of it. And I'm sure the board understand that as well. That's so, we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. I appreciate all the discussion and the clarity. Clerk, could you please call the roll, the vote?
Thank you, Chair Bush. Member Garcia,
Yes.
Member Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Member Gloria,
Yes.
Member Gomez.
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
Member Medina,
Aye.
Member Vargas,
Vargas, aye.
Vice Chair Shu,
Aye.
Chair Bush.
Yes.
Thank you. With members Lawson, Reamer, and Sanchez absent, that motion passes with those board members who are present voting aye.
All right, thank you again to the members of the public and the board members for the robust discussion. We are gonna go ahead because some of the members have to leave and we have a few informational items and then one more action item, but we're gonna go ahead and move item E3, the monitoring of the sewage from the Tequan River. We're gonna go ahead and move that next. And so, yeah, staff, if you could, Chief of Compliance, William Jacques, can come up and give a presentation. And let's see, clerk, could you provide the public testimony instructions on this?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Bush. I would ask any members of the public that wish to address the board on this item to please fill out a speaker slip if you are here in the room, and you can submit that to me up here in front. And if there are any members of the public that wish to address this item that are online, please press *9 now or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Your public testimony will be heard at the conclusion of the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Bush, members of the board, and members of the public. My name is Domingo Vigil, and with me is William Jacks, Chief of Compliance of the Compliance Division, and Kevin Bradley, Senior Chemist over our Community Air Monitoring Section. I'd like to highlight that on the line, we also have Amy Harvard, Director of the County Department of Environmental Health and Quality, and Dr. Kadakia from the Department of Public Health, in case there might be questions or we need assistance after the presentation. This is an informational item to provide an update on our monitoring efforts in and around the Tijuana River Valley related to sewage odors. No action is requested of the board today. I will turn it over to William to provide some background regarding our involvement with this issue, and then Kevin will walk us through our monitoring efforts and share some initial data from our sensors. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Domingo. Thank you, board members. As Domingo mentioned, my name is William Jacks. I'm the Chief of Compliance for the district. So the Compliance Division has been monitoring the border communities through inspections and odor complaint investigations for the past years. and determined that the odors in the Tijuana River Valley are a result of inoperable and inadequate infrastructure outside of APCD's jurisdiction. Failures from an inoperable international collector, a pipeline rupture, and an inoperable plant on the other side of the border have led to discharges through the canyons into the Tijuana River Valley and into the ocean to Imperial Beach. This slide shows the locations where recent complainants identified wastewater odors that's displayed here as red dots, which have been verified by district inspectors. As you can see, the dispersion of odors is spread throughout the border communities from the 805 to Imperial Beach, which is an indication that the source is not from one location, but from sources flowing into the Tijuana River Valley from the other side of the border at multiple locations and into the ocean. So with that, I will now turn the presentation over to Senior Air Pollution Chemist, Kevin Bradley.
Thank you, William. Thank you, William. Thank you, Domingo. Thank you, members of the board. So yeah, I want to give a little bit of information on the equipment that we're going to be using. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So through an EPA grant that we received, we purchased what's called AQ mesh sensors. Despite that being a federal grant, we are also funded. Mostly our staff is funded by a state grant through 8617. So the equipment that we're using, what's really important about it is that it is solar powered and that it transmits data through a cellular network. That gives us a lot of flexibility with where we can place these sensors, so we're not dependent on electricity, Wi-Fi networks, etc. So that's very useful within the Tijuana River Valley, of course, where that may not be readily available. These sensors monitor for a number of different chemicals. What we're going to be focused on today is hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a gas that causes that sort of rotten egg smell, typically associated with wastewater and sewage. Another important aspect about these sensors is that they are capable of measuring down below where a human nose can typically smell this particular chemical. So it's going to be important as we try to correlate our data with the information that we're getting from the community in terms of odors, in terms of when there are odors, when there's not odors, how the weather affects these things, et cetera. Next slide, please. So as far as where we're going to be placing these sensors, currently all 6 of them are at the orange pin that you see on the map here. That's our Fire Station 29 monitoring station in San Isidro. That monitoring station is really right in the middle of San Isidro, and what we want to do is spread these sensors out to more locations in the coming months. So we are in talks with Mayor Paloma from Imperial Beach, who is helping us get a sensor set up at the Civic Center in Imperial Beach. So that should be happening within the coming weeks. And then there are 4 other regions that we're looking into. Imperial Beach Pier has been advocated by the community in Imperial Beach. Also the neighborhood of Nestor, we're looking at a couple of locations there. Otay Mesa West as well. And then within the Tijuana River Valley itself, potentially at the water treatment plant so that we have more of a source level data. So those are we have 6 total sensors, and those are kind of the 6 general regions that we're looking at. Next slide, please. So as far as what the data is telling us, so this data is from when we first put a sensor out, we wanted to make sure we could get it transmitting correctly, the power was working, et cetera. And what we found, if you look at the gray horizontal line on this graph, that's that 10 part per billion limit where a human nose would typically be able to smell this chemical. And then the 30 part per billion, the orange horizontal line, is actually the California Air Resources Board's ambient air quality standard for hydrogen sulfide. My understanding is that that's more of a nuisance level odor type standard rather than a health-based standard. But just to point out that sometimes the data does actually spike over that limit in this first sort of week or so of data. And typically we are seeing the data exceed that 10 part per billion limit. And so the reports we're getting from the community about consistent, persistent odors are really backed up by the data that we've collected so far. Next slide, please. So this data is actually with all 6 of our sensors operating together in the same location. So again, we're seeing pretty consistent spikes over that 10 part per billion limit. We're actually not seeing as many spikes over that 30 part per billion California Air Resources Board standard. But still, again, we're seeing consistent moments where there should be, or theoretically would be, odors that people could smell. Another key part of this slide that I want to point out is that the data is tracking very well. What I mean by that is that when one sensor goes up, the rest of the sensors go up. When one goes down, the rest go down. So That's really what we want to see here when we have 6 sensors in the same place, gathering the same air. Theoretically, they should be following the same trends, even if the number that they're reporting is not exactly the same. And I want to talk a little bit more about why they're all in the same place. So if we go to the next slide. So a really important part about the data that we're collecting is we need to make sure that the data that we collect, that we have a lot of confidence in the accuracy of that data. And so again, we have all 6 sensors measuring the same place. We're seeing good tracking. That's a good first step. The next step there is going to be purchasing what's called a reference grade analyzer. So a reference grade analyzer is essentially a much larger piece of equipment. It's not as versatile in terms of where we can place it the way the sensors are. But what you can do with this type of analyzer is essentially expose it to a known level of hydrogen sulfide and calibrate the instrument to that level. So it helps us essentially anchor our sensor data back to that reference grade analyzer so that we have a lot of confidence in the accuracy of the data that we're collecting. I already mentioned that we're looking at other locations to put those sensors so that we have a little bit more of an idea of the spatial variation and where these odors are moving and what the levels are at different times in different places. In addition to that, as much as we review different standards and try to understand what those standards mean, we're not health experts necessarily at APCD, and so we want to make sure that we're collaborating with people who are and making this data available to a number of different agencies and institutions so that more studies can be conducted so that we have a much deeper understanding of how this is affecting human health and on top of that, of course, how the problem changes over time in terms of different projects that go into place to hopefully rectify this issue. And so we are ourselves continuing to research what different health-based standards mean, what different levels of hydrogen sulfide mean, excuse me, for human health. So next slide, please. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. We have our contact information up. If anybody has follow-up questions after today, of course, we're available for questions right now as well.
All right, thank you, staff, for the presentation. And clerk, do we have any members of the public?
Thank you, Chair Bush. We have one member of the public wishing to address the board on this item. I would call forth now Jason Giffen. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. Please begin by stating your name for the record.
Thank you, Jason Giffen. Thanks very much, Chairman Bush, company members. I'll just briefly point out, obviously, we're working with your staff on a number of things. This is one of the other topics. Obviously, the board with the regional coalition is really focused on, microphone on that? Along with the regional coalition, we have, thank you. Again, Jason Giffen with the Port District. Thanks very much, Chairman Bush, governing members. I just want to say, Port staff and APCD staff, we work on a number of issues. We've been focusing on Tijuana River Valley with the regional coalition for a very long time, and we're really grateful that APCD and the governing board is taking a look at this opportunity to collect additional information. When we look at the watershed and the airshed, there's obviously a lot of interplay between those two spheres. And just so you know, the board's going to continue to be at the table working with Paula and Domingo as you deploy the sensors and see if there's any other opportunities, especially given 2 of our members, both City of San Diego and the City of Imperial Beach, are very close to those areas. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Giffen. Clerk, any other comments from the public?
That concludes public testimony on this item.
Okay, with that, any board member questions or comments on this item? Member Vargas and then member Gloria.
Thank you, and thank you so much for all the work on this. David Torres from my team, previously was on my team, was one of the first folks who worked on this initiative and very, very important to us, and working very closely with the mayor of Imperial Beach and the City of San Diego, and this continues to be a top priority. Declared it a public health crisis, and then now an emergency, and continue to look for additional resources to solve the issue from its source, but incredibly important, especially with the recent information in the newspaper and information that's being gathered at UCSD. But I think the more data that we can gather, and I know that we have been gathering information on the Mexican side as well, right, with the Consul and other information, but I'm assuming that that's still being done. And that is continuing information that you're continuing to gather, right?
Correct. It's not, that's not specific to the Tijuana River Valley, but it's information on air pollution on the other side of the border too, that we're collaborating with the consulate.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to make sure that we're making that connection, and if there's any way and what we can do and maybe make that connection to CARB, because obviously, what is happening on the US side is also happening on the Mexican side, and as we're advocating for additional dollars and the impact that it's having on the health of our communities on both sides of the border, has a great impact. And, you know, those are communities that I represent, and as, you know, all you have to do is just go down there and even you smell, right? And so it's very important for the health of our communities as we're moving forward. So the more data that we can gather, the more that we are able to share and as I'm down there, I hear it more and more from the community, and I think finding solutions is gonna be very important. So appreciate it, and then whatever else we can do. And then making the connection to CARB, I think is gonna be really critical as well. And seeing what we can do from there. I know that one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is how do we get resources from maybe from Seven, because I think that is a big piece of it as we're moving forward in the future. So I'm looking forward to gathering additional data and what that's gonna look for. So thank you for the information, and I'm looking forward to next steps.
Thank you, Member Vargas, Member Gloria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For staff, just a couple of questions. Has any of the data that you've collected to date indicated any sort of airborne diseases that are currently being transmitted in the area?
I can say that. The data that we're collecting is not related to any pathogens. And so we don't have that type of information with the sensors that we have. However, we have been having conversations with some of our colleagues on the public health side, so that, you know, they are aware of our monitoring efforts, and so that they can also help share information about any information that might get to them in terms of any spikes in health issues in those populations.
What is the involvement of public health or environmental health and quality?
And
information sharing.
We actually have them on the line. They're more on the side of beach water quality monitoring, but I don't know if Amy Harvard is on the line.
Actually, it's here. I'm Dr. Kadaki. I'm here for public health. Good afternoon. So for the public health side, we have met with our APCD colleagues to hear about this testing that they're doing. And we do monitor the beach water with ddPCR testing, which basically looks for any bacteria in the water that might be pathogenic, and pathogenic meaning infectious. It does take, drinking in contaminated water. So if we have beach water that is contaminated, that can cause illness if someone's ingesting that water. What APCD is looking at is any pollution or pathogens that are in the air. And so there still needs to be further studies. There was a study at UCSD by Dr. Pratt. They're also looking at any of these pathogens that we've seen in the water aerosolized in the air to cause disease. Some of you know I'm an infectious disease physician, and so it does usually take a large amount of inoculum of bacteria to cause disease, and so there have been some separate cases reported inland, for instance, in the Imperial Beach area, where individuals have felt nausea or have had some gastrointestinal symptoms, but have not had any beach water exposure. And so we are investigating. We take every case seriously, and we actually have staff down in a clinic in Imperial Beach today, looking at data from a clinic and investigating and gathering some of the data that Chair Vargas was also speaking to, needing to have additional data. But so far in our surveillance systems, in terms of an increase in gastrointestinal illness or diarrheal illness in South Bay, as well as looking at Imperial Beach in particular, we have not seen an increase in any cases, including diseases that we normally would cause gastrointestinal illness, such as shigellosis or pathogenic E. coli. So we haven't seen a trend in our hospitalizations going up or our emergency room visits going up related to gastrointestinal disease. But of course, we continue to monitor that public health surveillance and doing additional investigation.
And if I may, just one point of clarification, the monitoring that we're doing is not really for pathogens, it's for air pollutants. But I'll say that some of the health effects of, being exposed to hydrogen sulfide include nausea, headaches, some of those symptoms. And we have received reports from residents in the area. We meet with our International Border Community Steering Committee every month, and every month, without exception, we hear, complaints from residents regarding them being exposed to these odors and some experiencing these types of symptoms. Now, I think it would be important to know that not all of these symptoms would warrant necessarily a visit to the doctor. So I don't know how those could be documented, but that's also something that we're trying to do a little bit more research on, is how does the chronic exposure to these odors can affect the community members. So that's information that we're still working on obtaining as well.
And Mayor, I do want to mention that it's a top priority for my team that we are continuously monitoring with our public health team about our local emergency rooms and our ensuring that if there's any peaks that we may see or anything that we should know about or monitoring to ensure that that we are following up, to see if there's any challenges that we're facing. So I think as we hear from our public health officers, that it's something that we are not taking lightly, to see that we're continuously monitoring. So I didn't mean to jump in. I just want to make sure that you know that it's on our radar. Dr. Wooten and Liz Hernandez from our team, and the folks are right now, they have it on their radar as something that is a top priority for us. So.
Thank you, Supervisor. So it sounds like the right questions are being asked, the right lines of communication exist. It sounds like there's the potential of identifying any kind of nexus with poor public health outcomes. And I'm talking about the nuisance, although let's just admit this is not acceptable. I mean, when I say nuisance, I mean, yeah, it's annoying, but we're an advanced country, this shouldn't be happening, right? But with regard to how this impacts public health, beyond just nausea and things of that nature, I think we're studying this with the hopes of understanding that we know exactly the impacts on our population. And then importantly for this group, the enforcement to come after it. Now, I'm assuming we're too early in the process to have any enforcement. I recognize the sources are probably outside of our jurisdiction, but I'm hoping that that's on the table. I'm hoping that those who are contributing to this problem, or at least contributing to the lack of action on this issue, understand that this organization is looking at it. We're compiling information, we're talking with other jurisdictions, and we're doing everything we possibly can to advocate for people who shouldn't have to live like this. I'm seeing a lot of naughty heads. I've had other meetings, and I appreciate the openness with me. I just find this so unacceptable, and the water situation has been long present in South Bay. That's unacceptable. But as I've said in other times, I recognize recreation in our ocean environments often seems elective. Breathing is not. And the fact that you can't go to portions of my city and breathe without being offended by the odor or being nauseous is just, I'm sure there's a more eloquent way to say this, but this is beyond not cool, right? And I want to hold people accountable. I'm angry, and I want folks to know that this organization is doing all we can. There was some conversation about last thing, Mr. Chair. I know there was some conversation need to spread out the sensors elsewhere. Any more need for City of San Diego properties or buildings for the siting of these sensors? If so, there's something I can do to help with that.
At the moment, not that I know of, but our staff is looking and meeting with other folks who may be landowners or maybe different entities that are responsible. We are in talks with City of San Diego Parks and Rec for certain locations as well. So we have been in touch with the City of San Diego.
If you're not getting the answers you need or want, let me know, please, sincerely and truthfully. We want to be a part of the solution on this. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for putting this on the agenda. Thank you, staff, for the work that you're doing. Just absolutely unacceptable. This is not cool. And this organization, I'd like to see take a leading role in making sure we're pushing back against this. I want us to, throw our lot in with Port of San Diego, with the Coastal Commission, all the other folks who are trying to work on this issue. Water quality being damaged is bad. This is even worse. Right? People should have the ability to wake up in their homes and not smell this smell. So thank you for collecting the data. I see that's the first step. The following on steps is enforcement and ultimately resolution. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Member Gloria. Member Garcia and then Member Medina.
Hi, thank you for addressing this, and I appreciate the work that the staff has done to investigate this. And as Domingo had mentioned, what we're looking at is the hydrogen sulfide and some of the other noxious gases, is my understanding. A lot of people don't know about hydrogen sulfide. I myself am not an expert, but I have done a lot of reading on it recently, because this is a public health emergency. Acute, just from the CDC website, we know that hydrogen sulfide can cause problems with the nervous system. It is a respiratory irritant. It can cause problems with breathing, shortness of breath, cough. It can cause lung hemorrhage in high enough levels. We can have irregular heartbeats. We can have arrhythmias. We can cause problems with our kidneys. So as Mayor Gloria mentioned, it is not okay not to be able to breathe. People can't go outside and breathe. They can't go outside and exercise. How are they going to get to work? How are they going to contribute? Okay, but not just that. We have a right to be able to live in our own city. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Garcia. Member Medina.
Yes, I have a question for the doctor or maybe Domingo. You said you have not found any increases in illnesses that are associated with, bacterial contamination. But I'm just curious what is the baseline for the South Bay or for that area around Imperial Beach? If it's higher than everywhere else in the city, that might be an indication of what the source is of the problem. So I'm just curious if that kind of data is available.
Yes, thank you for that question. And we have looked at data of specifically Shigella cases, since we know Shigella is usually a pathogen, a bacteria that's found that can cause infectious diarrhea. So that was something that we were concerned about. And we found actually that we looked at all of 2022 data as well as 2023 data for Imperial Beach, as well as all of South region. And we did not find an increase in the number of cases compared to all of the county. Looking at and then we also, in addition to just cases, another way to look at data is by rate. And so we actually looked at the rate of Shigella cases by HHSA region, so Central, East, North Central, North Coastal, North Inland, and South, and found that the rate for 2023 for South was at 13.6, compared to 2022 at 22.3. And then we went all the way back to 2018, and I'll just read the numbers to you. 20.2 for 2018, 14.5 for 2019, 12.5 for 2020, 18.9 for 2021. So the trend is actually for 2023 lower than in previous years. And then looking at the data compared to other regions, we also saw for 2023, for instance, Central region was at 27.4 for their rate versus 13.6 for South. And similarly for the other regions, South region was lower or on par, but below that 27.4, which was Central region. And then we also looked at STEC cases, which is Shiga toxin producing E. coli. This is another sort of bacteria that can cause bloody diarrhea. Normally, we associate it with contaminated food or someone who's had diarrhea. And again, we looked at Imperial Beach as well as South and looked at the cases for 2022 and 2023, and they were well below what we saw for all of San Diego for 2022 and 2023. But we do continue to monitor closely. And again, like I said, we do have an ongoing investigation. We've reached out to other clinics in South Bay and around the Imperial Beach area to also look at their data and have made data requests to them. And like I said, we have staff actually in South Bay today assisting a particular clinic to try to mine that data so that we can also compare that data to what we're collecting and try to determine if we can find if there is an increases in gastrointestinal illness or other illness that may be related to the sewage contamination in South Bay.
Thank you.
Member Burke Garcia.
Sorry, I do appreciate those numbers and the information you provided. But I do have a little bit of concern about how accurate that data may or may not be, not because of your methods of obtaining it, but because we have a lot of our South community as a native South San Diegan that are binational. So we have a lot of people who may work and go to school in like the Imperial Beach area, but live or get medical care south of the border. And I was wondering if there's been any collaboration to see what the numbers are looking like there, because I know that my mom used to take me across the border, even though I had insurance here, when she didn't agree with the answers that the doctors gave up here. So I'm sure that's still happening. Thank you.
Yes, that's a great point. Oh, sorry, this is Dr. Kadaki again. And yes, that is a great point. And yes, we are looking at demographic data. So for instance, patients that are accessing these clinics for care, we're looking at asking these clinics to provide zip code data, for instance, or where do these individuals live so that we can see, do these individuals live in South Bay, do they live elsewhere, so that we can also determine that trend.
But it wouldn't be hard for me to connect you to, like CINSA, for instance, which is probably the one that most of folks who people are going to. So I'm happy to do that with without a problem to our colleagues here in the county. I'll follow up with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Domingo, did you have anything to add with that?
Just one thing as part of the comments that we received in our community steering committee meetings, a lot of the symptoms that are reported to us are more in line with headaches and nausea and things like that. And the challenge with that too is that not, those symptoms sometimes don't warrant a doctor's visit, right? So all of those, cases are not really being reported.
Thank you for bringing that up with the data. And so seeing no other member comments, I really appreciate the member Burke Garcia's suggestion about just the focus on this being a binational region and the collaboration. That's really important. This issue that's been on the news a lot lately, that we hear a lot of issues about not at APCD. So I really appreciate staff for doing the research and bringing this up. And the other just comment I would make to this gets a lot of a discussion, and how I see it framed a lot of the times, it's like a Mexico versus US thing, and it's Mexico's pollution. And just want to remind everyone that if we're talking about the root cause of it, let's not just make fingers and blame Mexico, because the reality is we are also a source of the pollution and the issue too. When we look at NAFTA, when we look at our international policies, we are the corporations, a lot of them are American corporations or international, they're not paying taxes, or they're getting a lot of tax breaks, and that's less funding and less resources that the Mexican government, whether it's at the state, federal, or local level, has to combat that pollution. And their GDP is what, like I think 1/20th or something like that, the size of the United States. And so I keep hearing, oh, well, Mexico needs to do this, Mexico needs to do this. Well, when it comes to, we see the issues in Mexico, but safety, but policing. So this, not to excuse them, but this isn't necessarily the highest priority. And so recognizing that it's inevitable that if we really want to address this, if we want to treat it as a crisis that it is, we have to invest the resources, we have to collaborate. And I'm seeing a lot of that renewed leadership in the collaboration and looking at this not as a Mexico problem, but just it's a region. So just keeping that in mind, that a lot of the source, the economics too, it's partly us too. So we just gotta keep that in mind. So but really appreciate the discussion, and of course to our staff for being proactive and keeping this monitoring and keeping the data. So let's keep up the hard work. Thank you guys. With that, we will appreciate the presentation. This was an information item of membership or vice chairship. Did you have
No,
question? Okay, moving on to, going back, I was gonna move on to E4. We're going back to E2. This is this is also an informational item. Won't require any board action, but we're gonna get an update on the Office of Environmental Justice. So that's Domingo and Monique Lopez.
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would ask any members of the public that would like to address the board on this item that are here in the conference room to ensure that you have already submitted a speaker slip here to the clerk. Those that are members of the public that are joining us via teleconference, you can dial into the teleconference line now using the instructions provided on your Zoom screen. You may also indicate that you wish to speak on this item by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen or by pressing *9 now. All public testimony will be heard at the conclusion of the staff presentation.
Thank you, and good afternoon again. Domingo Vigil here with the Deputy Director, and I'm here with Monique Lopez, Program Coordinator in the Office of Environmental Justice, or Office of EJ. We are very excited to share with you the Office of EJ's accomplishments and progress for 2023. It has been a very busy year focused on continuing implementation of our Community Air Protection Program, working internally to integrate environmental justice considerations into our operations, growing our environmental justice community networks, and cultivating relationships with community-based organizations throughout the region, and securing seed funding to help us expand our work. Today's updates will highlight 6 key program areas that support the goals of the Office of EJ's framework, as well as next steps for the incoming year. This is an informational item and no action is requested of the board today. I will now turn it over to Monique for the rest of the update. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Domingo. Thank you, Domingo, and happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and happy Kwanzaa. Thank you, Chair Bush and members of the board for your attention. I know we're late in the afternoon, but I guarantee this is going to be a very exciting presentation. There's some really good things to talk about. So the first couple of areas we would like to highlight relate to the implementation of our Community Air Protection Program, also known as AB 617 program. First, I'll share some highlights of our work with the international border community. This past year, the Office of Environmental Justice and the Community Air Monitoring staff, so Kevin is the senior chemist on that staff, we worked really closely with the International Border Community Steering Committee, also known as IBCSC. The IBCSC includes community, industry, academia, community-based organization, and public agency representatives. We worked together to co-develop the Community Air Monitoring Plan for the communities of San Ysidro and Otay Mesa. The IBCSC identified key areas in the community where they would like air quality monitors due to air pollutants impacting community members. But in addition to that, we also worked closely with the IBCSC to co-develop what's called a Community Emission Reduction Plan or Program, or also known as CERP. The IBCSC, using both lived experience and also air quality data, identified air quality priorities, but didn't stop there. Also works with this committee to identify and co-develop strategies to address these air quality issues. We are nearing the completion of the participatory planning process of the CERP, soon to be approved by the IBC, hopefully next week. And next month, we anticipate returning to your board with a detailed update about what is included in the IBCSC CERP, which will be proposed for your approval for subsequent submittal to the California Air Resources Board. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. Next is our work with the Portside community, and I saw Nick's here, and then Maritza was here earlier. We're very active in that committee. The Portside SERP is in its third year of implementation. So during the past 3 years, there have been key successes, such as the hotspots rule amended to reduce cancer risk thresholds from 100 in 1 to, 100 in 1 million to 10 in 1 million. Also, the distribution of 525 air monitors and air purifiers for Portside residents. Shout out to EHC for being our community partner on that. And also the enhancement of our air quality complaint program to add a 24/7 phone line and app. And so shout out to William and his team in compliance for helping make that happen. But this year, you know, the Office of Environmental Justice really sought to listen to the Portside CSC members regarding what they saw the needs were for the CSC and how they'd like to continue to engage in these CSC meetings. They shared that Portside CSC meetings had become places of just receiving information from the numerous presentations, albeit very informative, but they wanted to be more actively involved in the committee itself. So from these conversations emerged 3 active subcommittees that have been active this past year. The first subcommittee is the Implementation and Funding Subcommittee, which is currently focusing on developing a set of course, using SERP strategies as the foundation, but criteria for future proposed projects in the Portside communities in order to ensure that any future projects advance and not compromise the achievement of the SERP's goals. The second active subcommittee include monitoring and data review subcommittee that closely actually works with the APCD community monitoring staff to review data and presentations and provides feedback to ensure that data is shared in an accessible and meaningful manner prior to when it's presented to the general public or CSC as well. And then lastly, there's a community outreach subcommittee that is working on ways to get more community members involved in the local CSC. Next slide. The third area that we'd like to highlight is our work to integrate our public participation plan into APCD's strategic planning process that we're currently undergoing. We heard from APCD board to include environmental justice communities in developing this strategic plan. The Office of EJ has been actively implementing the practices and principles in the public participation plan to guide our efforts in facilitating 10 workshops in environmental justice communities. One of those workshops was exclusively with public health providers in East County to get their perspective. And we did this all in partnership with community-based organizations throughout the region. APCD has been meeting with the community where they are at, plugging into already existing reoccurring community meetings, both virtually and in person. And workshops have been held in English, Spanish, and also Arabic as well. This was a big lift for our small team right here. Plus, I want to definitely acknowledge Victoria Zorn, who's a student worker who really helped a lot on this. But it was a big list, but well worth the effort as we saw our work with the community in identifying priorities for the strategic plan, incredibly important to contributing to the goal of integrating environmental justice and equity in APCD's operations, policies, and regulations. Next slide. In addition to the external work that I just shared, but the external and community-based work, the Office of Environmental Justice has also been focusing upon internal APCD operations and foundational information to ensure that all divisions are working to advance environmental justice. We are doing this in several ways, such as working with the engineering and IT teams to develop an accessible and interactive permitting information map, which in the new year will be launched very soon. Also co-developing environmental justice guidance in rule development analysis and when more intensive outreach is needed in permitting. And developing resources such as maps of environmental justice communities throughout the region and community profiles to share with board members and the public for educational purposes and as foundational materials for the Office of Environmental Justice and all the APCD divisions to be able to identify and work with EJ communities throughout the region. Next slide. That's not all. Okay, there's more. So this year, and this is something that I'm probably just filled with so much joy. But this year has really been a year of cultivating relationships with community-based organizations and agencies throughout the region that are working with communities facing environmental injustices. We started these conversations by co-developing a vision regarding what a partnership could and should look like between APCD and these CBOs, but also the communities that they are in relationship with. And we also included collaborations with the California Air Resources Board and the County of San Diego's Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. Next year, we plan to start implementing the vision we've co-developed, and we are adding 2 new staff members to support with this work moving forward. An air quality specialist and a public outreach specialist. We know that the needs in the community are greater than the capacity we have in the new year, but we will continue to work with these communities and creatively seek grant funding and explore sustainable funding models to grow the Office of Environmental Justice, to be able to fully implement the vision the community has set and be able to meet community needs. Next slide. This one's really exciting. There's a money and sign and $1 million there. So the Office of Environmental Justice already started the process of seeking and securing resources to fund the collective vision developed with the community-based organizations I mentioned on the previous slide. We were recently awarded $1 million in one-time funding from the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a unique grant opportunity where at least 30% of it will be pass-through funding that will go directly to community-based organizations to support their engagement and work on the project. The Office of Environmental Justice will use these funds to work with communities facing environmental injustices to improve air quality. We will be working with 8 community-based organizations and public or agency partners listed in the previous slides to pilot a new approach to the Community Air Protection Program, also known as CAP. This reimagined CAP, which can also serve as a statewide model, will be less time and resource intensive for both APCD and participating communities than the current program. The program will utilize popular education and participatory planning to have community members identify air quality issues, engage additional agencies and jurisdictions, and co-develop solutions to address these issues as well. Additionally, this effort will allow us to expand our monitoring network through the installation of sensor-based monitors throughout environmental justice communities region-wide. The program will also include the establishment of a new regional air quality focused environmental justice working group convened in partnership with the County of San Diego, Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice. Next slide, please. The actions highlighted in this presentation contribute directly to the attainment of our Office of Environmental Justice goals, as you can see on the screen behind me. A couple of years ago, the APCD board adopted and directed staff to implement the Office of Environmental Justice framework, which in reality is not necessarily just a framework for the Office of Environmental Justice, but it's really a framework for the entire agency at APCD, and providing a framework how we can and should be doing our work in a manner that advances environmental justice region-wide. The Office of Environmental Justice has been taking the lead on implementing these goals in partnerships with various divisions within APCD, with community-based organizations region-wide and community members. Similarly, all of the work presented today is in direct alignment with the equity statement adopted by your board last year, and it demonstrates APCD's strong commitment to advancing equity and environmental justice in the region. Next slide, please. The Office of Environmental Justice with APCD staff and other divisions, CBOs, and the community has done a lot this year to start really cultivating the soil for the work ahead. We anticipate next year this work will increase and our impact will be greater. And having 2 new staff join the Office of Environmental Justice team will help make this happen. Our engagement and work with the international border and portside communities will continue. And an important upcoming milestone for our work with the International Border Community Steering Committee will be the approval of their cert by your board and CARB early next year. And also, we look forward to continuing our work to incorporate an environmental justice framework into our operations and to finalizing our mapping and community profiles for EJ communities throughout the region so that we can share that information with this board, the public, and APCD staff. And finally, we are excited about the one-time $1 million EPA grant recently secured, and we will move into full implementation of this grant this upcoming year. Really, this funding is seed money to start the process of more deeply and widely engaging communities that are disproportionately impacted from air pollution. And we acknowledge, though, that in order to sustain and expand this engagement into the future, we need to look for various funding opportunities. And at APCD, we are committed to doing this work with you all with great care and great creativity. Next slide, please. So this concludes my exciting presentation. I know, it's late. And we are available to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Monique. Any other staff comments? Anything to add on with that? So, yes.
I must jump in here and just say how proud I am of their team in this office because they have really just, you know, we are a model for the state, and I don't know if that was really, I know that was probably mentioned in the presentation, but maybe not made as clear as it should be. When I am at statewide meetings of APCOs from around the state, definitely our EJ efforts are seen as a model. And the work that we're doing, one of the reasons CARB is partnering with us so closely is because of the groundbreaking work that this team is doing. So I just had to jump in there and say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank Monique, Domingo, Paula, so the whole EJ team. Just really appreciate from the bottom of my heart all your guys' work, and it's so innovative. It's being proactive. Environmental justice is absolutely, for me, that's the existence of our agency. We're here to protect clean air, to keep clean air and air quality and health. And so that's all what environmental justice does. And I do want to see that, which, you know, you indicated in the presentation, expanding that to really having an EJ lens through everything that we do, all of our departments. And sometimes all organizations kind of have silos. And so I think looking at it through an EJ lens will really help all of our work, whether it's accounting, you know, chemistry, there's meteorology. So all of that, I really hope to see, you know, this kind of lens, what that looks like. So I appreciate that. Congratulations on getting the grants. And one of the things I was going to ask, and you answered it in your presentation, is I've seen public agencies, when they work with these community-based organizations, it's great. But if we're going to ask the community members to come to meetings, we're going to ask them to do the work. We do need to recognize that everyone has to work in the society, and we shouldn't ask community things for free. We do need to, but I don't want to have us exploit folks' labor. And yes, coming to a meeting at a certain point, especially working class people with the economic situation, it's not easy to come to these meetings. And so wherever there's opportunities to, even if it's not, it's not, full-time staff or even part-time, but whether it looks like stipends, I mean, just come to a meeting, having food, having dinner, not just, and healthy pizzas and stuff like that. I think we should be proactive on that. And doing that through these community-based organizations, it's not completely new work. We've seen it done before at Sandag with their CDO program. When I was an intern there, they had their mini grants, but it wasn't that much. It was 30,000, and there were some other issues I had with it. But so this, I think, really expands on the work, makes it more innovative, and it is more just in providing these resources to the community-based organizations so that they can expand and they can truly do effective outreach. So I don't know, Monique, do you have a comment about that?
In addition to the CBO compensation, we've also built into the grant as well, stipends for community members, childcare, translation services, food as well, just to make these spaces more accessible and honors people's, time and knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear it. So really appreciate that. Any other member or actually, did we already call for public speakers? Did I forget about that?
For the record, there are no members of the public that wish to provide public testimony on this item, but yes.
Okay. Long day, so just want to make sure I do my job. Any other member comments? Vice Chair Shu and then Member Martinez.
Sure, I just wanted to make one quick comment in regards to pointing out that having this process work into the strategic planning process for APCD. I think that's very important. I see the potential for a lot of institutional change, and as I look at all these organizations in government, sometimes you change the staff, sometimes you change the management and board, but the institution itself needs to change, and so that's an entity that we need to work in. I hope that process works well, and I'm so happy to see that as part of what you're working on.
All right, Member Martinez.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Really, it is exciting, I agree. So just want to thank you for your work, and I do agree with Paula that I feel like you all really, the work that you're doing is a model. I know that whenever I want to improve community engagement in my city, Domingo, I'm asking for presentations, and so I just appreciate the work that you do, and then I'm really proud that at APCD we hire the right people that have those community relationships and deeply understand and are from the communities that we work with. So I really love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Martinez. And with that, seeing no other board questions or comments, we will move on to item E4, the adoption of the 2024 legislative program for the APCD. Clerk, could you please provide the public testimony instructions, and then we'll move on to Ms. Forbes for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Bush. I would ask any members of the public that are joining us here in the chamber that wish to provide public testimony on this item to please complete a speaker slip and submit it to me now. For those that are joining us via teleconference, I would ask that you please use the instructions that are provided on your Zoom screen. You may press *9 or the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to indicate that you wish to speak. Your testimony will be heard at the conclusion of the staff presentation.
Ms. Forbes?
Thank you. It's hard to follow the AJ presentation. I cannot promise that this one will be as exciting, but nevertheless, here we are. Thank you, Chair Bush and governing board members. This item is a request for your board to adopt the 2024 legislative program for the district. And in this presentation, I'll give an overview of the program, including our priorities and guidelines, as well as provide an update regarding the development of our legislative advocacy resources within the district. Next slide, please. So by way of background, at the March 9th, 2023 meeting, the governing board adopted a legislative program that established federal and state priorities that aligned with the district's mission. In addition, the program includes guidelines which allow staff to act on critical matters that may require immediate decision-making and could affect the district. The guidelines cover the areas of air quality, public health, environmental justice, climate change, and funding. Next slide, please. So for 2024, the following are the legislative priorities that we've identified for the coming year based on conversations with other agencies, other air districts, elected officials, and stakeholders. Some of these priorities are being carried over from the previous year. And so the first one here relates to Department of Motor Vehicle fee increase and process changes. And this is a continuation, a holdover from the prior year. The DMV fee increase is a priority that, as you may recall, last year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District introduced. And we supported legislation to decrease the vehicle registration fees recovered by local air districts. That effort was not successful last year, but we understand there may be interest this year for a new bill to be introduced. Since this is an important funding source for the district, and since our existing $4 fee has not been increased since 2009, we recommend continued support of these efforts. Next, the South Coast Air Quality Management Districts also authorized staff to seek legislation to update some requirements of the Carl Moyer incentives program. These would expand the liquidation timeframe for Moyer funding from 4 to 6 years, giving us more ability to fund projects that have a high complexity or perhaps some delays in getting equipment. It would also increase administration fees for air districts, for the larger air districts, from a fee of 6.25% to an admin fee of 10% on those grants. And this offsets increases in costs that we've had as the program has gotten more complex over time. So we recommend support of these concepts and note that, again, the existing administration fees that we get for the Moyer funding are not sufficient to cover our costs. So we are covering them with other resources at this time. Next slide, please. So the next priority that we've identified in the proposed program, again, comes out of the South Coast District. And this one would be to sponsor legislation to increase the maximum limits on compensation for governing board members of local air districts. And this legislation could broaden the availability of those stipends to include compensation for other board members, could increase per diem limits and reset outdated compensation limits. And I'll just note that the current compensation for our board members applies to our public board members and is in line with existing compensation in other districts in terms of the amount. But we do share the concerns of our colleagues up in South Coast that the compensation is not adequate, and our recommended position is to support these efforts in concept, expand the availability of those stipends and increase the amounts. Next slide, please. So there's also a bill that is still in the legislature. This is a 2-year bill that would increase stationary source civil penalties for Title V stationary sources. Originally, this bill was proposed to only apply to refineries, but is now, the language has been expanded to include other stationary sources. And staff recommends a support position on this legislation to promote ongoing compliance from our largest sources, which are Title V sources. Next slide, please. So this refers to a proposition probably many of you are well aware of, Proposition 1935, which is currently set to appear on the November 2024 state ballot. The proposition would expand definition of a tax to include most fees and require considerable evidence, like actual billing data, in order to justify the cost for providing each individual service. And if approved, this would severely impact APCD's ability to raise fees and implement new fees. And so it would also require that we go back and justify fees that we have adopted since January 1 of 2022. So the fee increases that have come through this board. You're probably aware there's a current lawsuit from the governor's office and the legislature to try to keep this proposition off of the ballot with a claim that it is an invalid revision to the California Constitution. But at this time, we recommend an opposed position on this proposition due to the severe impacts it would have on our operations. I'll just also note that there's a measure that was also added to the ballot, ACA 13, which will also be on the November 2024 ballot and would, if passed, increase the required voter approval percentage for any state or local initiative to ensure that initiative could only be approved by the same proportion of votes equal or higher to that imposed by the initiative at issue. So sorry if that's very confusing, but essentially it would require the same approval percentage for Prop 1935 as it would seek to impose in order to raise fees. So we recommend an opposed position on Proposition 1935 and a support position for ACA 13. Next slide, please. The last one I'll mention from our state legislative priorities is a legislation from Assemblymember Alvarez. And this is AB 1596, which was introduced to address the sewage crisis in the Tijuana River Valley. And it focuses on efforts at the State Water Resources Control Board. But because this issue is so complex and requires all hands on deck, as we discussed in our prior presentation, we're recommending support position on this legislation. Next slide, please. Moving on to our federal legislative priorities. The Cleaner Air Spaces Act, again, this is a continuation from last year. This was introduced by Representative Scott Peters in June of 2023. It would establish federal funding for a program similar to our Portside Air Quality Improvement and Relief Program, our PAIR program, and would provide grants to support local clean air spaces to protect residents from negative effects of wildfire smoke. And then there's also been proposed HR 5329 introduced by Congressman Josh Harder. This would allow the president to declare a smoke emergency when wildfire smoke creates hazardous air quality conditions. And it would make federal resources available during these extreme air quality events to help state and local communities respond. So we're recommending support positions on both of these measures. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last one I want to highlight for you is the EVs for All Act. This is other federal legislation that was introduced. It would expand EV infrastructure and accessibility for low-income residents, appropriate funds for expenses related to EV costs for residents in public housing, and include development of EV car sharing program by providing $1 million grants for public housing agencies, local governments, or nonprofit organizations. And we're recommending a support position on that legislation as well. Next slide, please. So those are the highlights from the priorities. The guidelines are predominantly, they were in your packet, predominantly carryovers from last year. I also wanted to highlight for you some program updates. And during the past few months, our staff has developed an internal program framework. Melina Mesa of our staff has been working on that and includes areas of focus and the district's involvement in local communities as well as other agencies. And also it provides for the development of templates and documents to ensure the initiation of a comprehensive legislative program. So as we've mentioned to you, this is a new program for APCD. We had not been previously very active in these spaces. And so we're currently still in development. Last year's legislative program was the first one that we adopted as a independent agency. So we're currently still developing our program. We're also planning to develop a legislative tour program to provide an overview for local legislators and their staff of district's areas of involvement, our agency structure, and provide them an overview of our work. So that's something we're planning to kick off in the new year. And we're very happy, last year, our board approved us to bring on a management fellow for legislative affairs. We are finalizing the hiring process for that and anticipate that person will be able to start with us in January of the new year. And so with that, we can go into the next slide. The recommended action today is for you to consider and adopt the 2024 legislative program. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Forbes. Clerk, do we have any members of the public that wish to address us on this item?
We have received no requests for public testimony today.
All right, great. Any member questions or comments? Yes, Member Medina.
Yes, this is in regards to the priorities of state and federal. Can we expand those to local also, or is there a limitation to doing that?
We can expand it to local. You know, this was originally designed as a state and federal legislative program, but certainly there's a lot of local places where APCD is participating, such as Sandag or other agencies. And so to the extent that the guidelines, the policy guidelines that follow here are implicated in local efforts, certainly I don't see a reason, I don't know if council has a different opinion on that, but I don't see a reason that we couldn't add it to the policy guidelines is what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Certainly we could add that.
Well, I would like to make a motion that we do that.
Okay. And so I think we're talking the introductory section for the legislative policy guidelines. Correct, okay.
I'll second. We don't have any specific local at this point, but I think, I mean, there's definitely opportunity moving forward, so. I'll second that. Any other member Medina, did you have any other questions or comments on this?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other board members?
Just to clarify,
Vice Chair Shu.
so is that also adopting what was presented or just additional?
I'm sorry, you're correct. I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation with that amendment.
No, second. Appreciate that clarification. All right, any other comments? All right, seeing none, clerk, we can call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Bush. Member Garcia,
Yes.
Member Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Member Gloria, Member Gomez,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
Member Medina,
Aye.
Member Vargas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Shu,
Aye.
Shepherd Bush.
Yes.
Thank you. With Member Gloria, members Gloria, Lawson, Raymer, Sanchez absent. That motion passes with those board members who are present voting aye.
Thank you, clerk. And finally, the Air Pollution Control Officer report.
Thank you, Chair Bush and board members. I know it's getting late. I have just a few brief updates. First, as just a reminder, and we talked about it a little bit in the OEJ presentation, our strategic planning process is underway and we're in the middle of a very extensive public outreach process. We also have a dedicated web page for receiving input from the public. And so we've developed a social media outreach toolkit. And I will be sending that out to all of you. And if you could help us in getting the word out to direct the public to that webpage, we would really appreciate it. Next, I wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming items for our January governing board meeting. We have opened the solicitation for applications for hearing board appointments for the positions of alternates in the attorney, medical, and public member seats, as well as the primary public member seat. And our clerk has opened the application process on our website. Again, we would appreciate any efforts that you or members of the public have in directing folks to apply for those seats. Those appointments will happen in January. Also in January, we're going to be starting a new series of agenda items to better elevate for you and the public some of the work that APCD does in the background that might otherwise not appear before the board. And last year, we started APCD spotlight sessions for staff, which involve lunchtime learning sessions about specific programs within APCD. This idea came from our employee engagement surveys, and our Deputy Director, Miney Luther, has been organizing the programs, and they've been really well received by staff. So what we're planning to do is bring shorter versions of those spotlight sessions to your board at every meeting so that you can see not only the great work that staff is doing, but get to see some of those staff members themselves. And we'll be kicking that off at our January board meeting. Next, I wanted to elevate some great work from our grants and incentives and OEJ teams. We've talked a lot about our PAIR program at the board, and our community partner on that, Environmental Health Coalition, has just wrapped up the first phase of that project. And it's really hard to kind of overstate the impacts that this project's had. EHC distributed 556 air monitors and 599 air purifiers in the Portside community, performed 727 home visits and 103 technical visits. And most of those monitors and purifiers went to individual homes, but 6 of them went to community centers, such as the Barrio Logan Child Development Center, Sherman Heights Community Center, and others in the community. And 10 of the homes that received that equipment were childcare centers, so additional children benefiting from the operation of those monitors and filters. Residents reported feeling healthier, getting sick less often, appreciated learning about air quality through these visits. And so just want to give a shout out to the partner, shout out to the County of San Diego, Port of San Diego, I know they've gone. And the Navy contributed funding to this program. And so we're really, pleased with the outcomes of that. So many kudos to the APCD staff that brought it to fruition and our community partners. And stay tuned because more, that program, as was mentioned, is going to be expanded out to other communities. I also want to congratulate the San Diego Foundation, EHC, and their collaborative partners, of which we are one, on their receiving the Transformative Climate Communities, or TCC grant, for their Rooted in Comunidad Cultivating Equity project. And that project involves the communities of Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, Mount Hope, Shelltown, several others, and includes a community land trust, tree planting, transit stop improvements, solar and EV charging for Chicano Park Shuttle, community resource center, many other actions to improve the lives of community residents. $22 million grant. And so it's exciting to see these kinds of collaborative efforts bring funding to our region. I'm hoping it can continue to be a catalyst for additional funding. We know there's still a lot of federal IRA grant funding that is open. And so really exciting to see, and just want to congratulate all the partners on that. And finally, we talked a lot today about the potential MOU with the port regarding indirect source emissions. I also just wanted to note that as a separate effort, staff is continuing to work with the warehouse working group that was established at the direction of the board. That group has met 3 times, consists of businesses, local agencies, and public health and community stakeholders. Dr. Burkbeck Garcia assisted us in getting some public health representation on that committee, and that's been very helpful. And we anticipate continuing to meet with them over the next several months as we refine concepts for potential rule or incentives options. And more information about the group can be found on our website. So that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Oh, and calendars. How can I forget? Oh, I don't even have one to hold up. Where's Melina? Right, so Melina, our public information officer, worked with her student worker to develop the calendars as a result of an art contest with local kids, and we're really proud to give them to you today. Please, thank you. Here we go. And then please pick up some copies at the back. Feel free. We have many copies. Thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Anyone else? Any other member comments? All right, seeing none, thank you again, Ms. Paulo-Forbes, for everything, all you and your staff's work. Great meeting. With that, meeting adjourned.